Before we export this model to Mudbox, I want to talk about UVs in this video. And UVs are the kind of way that we can apply texture. It's the way that Maya resolves applying texture, image-based texture, the way it resolves the kind of outer surface and what we see on our model. You can think about UVs as a kind of wrapping paper, kind of flat wrapping paper that gets wrapped around the object that then we can apply flat 2D images, PNGs or JPEGs, or TIFFs or Targas to the model, and so it does that, and it understands the way that those 2D images get applied to a 3D model by UVs. So let me go ahead and I kept our original model, and then I have my retopologized model using Quadra. I also did go in and add a couple edge loops here just because I wanted to keep these edges sharper and these surfaces smoother when I go and test out my smooth. I want it to look something like this. So I want this to be a little bit of a harder edge and also around the cap. To me, this just looks a little bit more like a paint tube. And by adding more detail here, the smooth becomes less drastic and a little bit more, and it retains a little bit of a sharpness. So, but always remember that when you press 3 on your keyboard, it doesn't necessarily mean that you've smoothed your object. It just means that you're previewing what the smooth function might look like. So let me go ahead and hit 1 and look and see again what my actual model looks like here. And so looking at my original model, my original NURBS to poly conversion, let's just go up to UV here, and we'll go to the UV editor. And so this is where we can see how the UVs, and it's almost indecipherable, but let me just show you that a texture, 2D texture is applied to this like 0 to 1, from 0 to 1 on the grid, and then it repeats throughout like a kind of infinitely large 2D grid space. And then this is how all of our polygonal shapes, all of our polygonal faces get kind of mapped to this 2D UV. Now this is how this is the default kind of UV mapping or UV setup here. And so if I go ahead and in my UV tool, I can choose a number of different ways to map the UVs. So if I just do automatic, what you can see is we have six basically planes. They're not really planes, but there's 6 ways that we're capturing, and they correlate to our orthographic cameras. Sorry about that. And these different planes kind of project and kind of capture which UVs are going to be just a way to lay out the UVs. I guess the best way to look at this is to go back to our UV editor, and now you can see this is the way that our UVs are being mapped. So it's a little bit easier to see how that this set of faces here correlate to a particular, and you can see it in our space in our viewport as well. You'll see these like white lines that show you how the UV mapping has kind of broken up this 3D object and laid it out flat within this 2D grid plane. And so what I can do now is I can go ahead and select individual faces in my viewport, or select individual faces here in my UV texture editor, and it correlates to a selection in my viewport here. But this is a little bit more decipherable at just how all of these faces are being kind of laid out and flattened, for which then I would be applying a texture to. Just to give you, to illustrate, like if you were to apply a texture, and a texture would be some kind of image-based two-dimensional image that you would then link to your material under the color node. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and do that here. Go back to object mode, and I'm going to say assign a new material, and I'll assign a Lambert. That's fine. And then in my let me go ahead. Let me just clean up this object, even though we're not going to really use it for anything. I think that this is a little bit simpler to see the nodes here without those like history nodes. So let me go to my Lambert 2, and then under my color node here I can click on this little checker box, and now it says create a render node. And if I have an image that I want to project that's my own, I can click file here, and it will allow me to link it to a particular file on my computer. Now you're going to want to, again, remember to save all of your files, like all of your texture files, to your source images folder in your project folder. That way, because that way they're all stored together in your project, because what this does is this creates a path back on your hard drive to where that file is. And so should you try to save or share this file with someone else or this model, if you're not exporting it, if you're just saving it as a Maya file, when you go ahead to try to reopen it on another computer or in another location, or somehow your file gets deleted or whatever, you're not going to have that path back. It's not going to be the same path to find that texture file. So just always save your texture files to your source images folder. Any image that you're going to be pulling into Maya to use gets saved there. But I don't have a particular file that I want to map, so just to illustrate how UVs work, I'm going to hit checker here. I can do cloth, I can do any number of these leather or granite, these kind of like default images here, but I'll just do checker. And I don't see anything here in my workspace, and that is because I have shaded mode on. I don't have shaded with texture. So if I hit 6 on my keyboard, I'll be able to see that texture now applied in my workspace. And so you can see, let's go back up to our UV editor here. And if I select my object, you can see how this two-dimensional image of a checkerboard gets mapped to this three-dimensional tube of paint. And so wherever there's these kind of lines, and it's a little bit hard to see where these edges are because of the black and white kind of quality here, but where these edges are, and let's go ahead and find a good edge that we can see in here, maybe is a good one. Right, so you can see where this seam is on the object and where it's mapped here. And so what you can end up doing, actually, it's kind of hard to see here. I wonder if I could change. Let me turn this off for a minute, right? I can turn on and off, looking at the texture or not. So this one might make it a little bit easier to kind of line things up. So what I might want to do is actually lay out these UVs a little bit differently. So I've done the automatic layout, which has given me a kind of a decent layout. At least I'm able to kind of understand what's going on here. It's a little bit more like legible the way that these UVs are mapped than based on like the default where they're overlapping each other. But I might want to kind of move these larger areas around, okay, because this seam doesn't really look very good, right? So what I can do in here is actually I can select a number of, depends on what mode I'm working in. I'm working in Edge right now. I can work in face mode. I can select a number of these faces here, like for all of these. Let's select this whole side. And using the transform tools of scale, rotate, and move, I'm able to change the position. Let me turn back on my checkerboard here. I'm able to change the position of this set of UVs, and you can see how it's doing this here on in our viewport. I'm able to change, where this section of mesh gets laid out on my 2D texture. So what I can do maybe is like rotate this. Let's see, where was my edge? And so I'm just going to go back, and my edge is right there. And so maybe what I want to do is start to kind of like line up where these, to line them up together. And if I work in edge mode, the edges that are shared are going to be selected together. So I selected this edge, and it's going to select this edge. And so, if I go to move one edge, I'm not able to move it without moving the other. But working in face mode, where there are these like large UV, where we have these border edges for our UVs, I am able to select a set of faces and move those faces, independent of moving any other face. So that's just something to keep in mind. So the way I would go about maybe thinking about laying out, and I'm just using my middle mouse wheel to scroll, and the same functions I would use to pan, because I don't orbit anywhere here because this is a 2D space. But what I can do, and as you can see actually here, that like this checkerboard, even though we're only seeing it in this 1x1 part of the grid, it does extend. And let's see, where are we looking at here? Let me select these faces again, find them. There they are, they're on the bottom. This texture extends infinitely. It repeats itself over the entirety of the grid. But what I can do now is I can just try to kind of like lay these UVs out in a way that lines them up potentially, right? So I have this edge here, and this is where, oh, I think I just lost my UV. Oh, there's my UV editor. So this is where maybe having a, if you can afford it, a second monitor, it becomes very, very useful. If you really start to love working in 3D modeling and animation, getting another screen that you can then, things start to get kind of cluttered here to really be able to see what we're doing. But let me go ahead and like move this over here. And just so we can, I'm trying to kind of line up these two edges a little bit better. And let's see if I kind of rotate this around. And what am I looking at? I think I'm looking at the bottom of this, which is right. And let me just make sure here. Okay, all right, we're looking at this seam to line up this seam with itself. Let me just, this is the seam we want to line up. So let me go ahead and select these faces, and I'm going to move this over and rotate it, and maybe try to like nestle it kind of in there. I can try to line it up as best I can. It's a little bit difficult because some of these, maybe I need to scale it a little bit up. And what ends up happening is because this is wrapping something, and again, with that automatic mapping, it's like projecting the image onto the mesh. And so where these faces are, they're not necessarily to the same scale and the same proportion as the faces are here. They're trying to work with a kind of projection of projecting this 2D image onto a 3D space. So let me go ahead and, so maybe something like that is a little bit better. Hard to kind of tell. They can overlap if we want them to. And it might be a better idea here to think about sewing some of these together. Like this edge here doesn't seem to make too much sense why this chunk is taken out. So in order to kind of fix this, maybe I want this face right here to actually connect to this part of the UV. So I would go to my edge mode, I would select just this edge, and I would go up to sew, cut, and I would say cut. And now it's giving me a hard edge there. And when I go back to face mode, I'm able to move this face independent of the this grouping of faces. And then what I can do is maybe I can pull it right up into here, and then go to edge mode and select these two edges and then say sew. And then what that does is that pulls those two together. And I can do the same thing here and go up to sew, and those will sew those together. And so what I would want to do then when I'm looking, this is the area, maybe I worked into vertex mode here, and I can kind of see how I would be manipulating these vertices. Maybe I want to manipulate this one, and see how maybe I need to manipulate these vertices to get this texture to kind of look right. And then we also have this, let's see, and so I can kind of correlate. I might want this little piece too to be a part of this part of the mesh. And so this is how, I mean, this is not an ideal layout of UVs using automatic mapping, but it is a way that we can start to kind of see how to work with mapping, with UV texture mapping. So another way I can do this is, so I've done the automatic here as well, and so it's done a kind of similar thing. But maybe what I want to do is I'd actually like the entirety of the top face and then the entirety of the bottom. I'd like to split this. I don't want this to be split up into 4. I'd like it to be split up into 2. And so a really nice way that we can do this actually is I can go into my selection tool, and I'm in face mode here. And I want to maybe increase my brush size. And I'm going to select all of these faces here. And I'm using this brush tool so I can kind of paint my selection, which makes it a little bit easier than shift clicking everything. And make sure I didn't select anything that I don't want, but I've selected the entire top part of this. Let me go ahead and hide this because I don't necessarily need to see this right now. Channel box layer editor, and just put 0. Just so, because I'm only working here with this model now. So, let me go in here, and I've selected the top. And so what I can do is, I can go into UV, and I can say planar. And if I say planar, now what it's done, oh, it's broken this up again. That's not what I wanted, not planar. I think just automatic maybe, what one was it that I always used to use? It's still wanting to break it up a little bit. I guess it doesn't really like what I've decided to do with it. Let me go in and move this out of the way. Camera based. Let me see camera based. So I've selected those, and if I say camera based here and apply, and so what this has done is it's based off of the camera that I'm in, and it's created those UVs. So let me actually go up to my bottom view. Go to bottom view. Okay, and I'm going to say here UV camera based. Okay, so there are my bottom UVs. The last thing I'm going to do, and I'm going to just move them out of the way here in my UV editor quickly, and the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a set. So I'm going to say create set quick select set, and let me go ahead and do that, and I'm going to say bottom. Okay, now let me go back into my perspective view, and I'm going to go to face mode, and I'm going to paint select all of these faces. And I'm just going to orbit around my viewport, and it's selected the bottom. Let me deselect all the faces and try that again. And I'm going to go to Create, Sets, Quick Select Set, and I'm going to say Top. And then I'm going to go in and select these faces on my tube. And I will go to Create, Set, Quick Select Set, and say Side of Cap. And then go ahead here and select. I want to deselect what I have, but let me make sure I know where my lines are, and I think I do. I'm going to go in and select all of these faces. And I'm going to say Create, Quick Select Set, and say Side Cap 2. And then maybe go in and just select these. Oh, I have to deselect first. And these. And go into Create, Set, and say Front Cap. Okay, so now I have some other parts of my model that I don't necessarily need, particularly these back faces. I mean, maybe I'll go in and I can select them. I'm not sure if they got automatically selected when I was selecting the sides, but let me go ahead and select these faces here, just so that I will make one more selection set and say back cap. Okay, so now what I can do is if I go to my select thing here and I can go to quick select sets, and now I have all of my selection sets. So I can very easily select whole parts of this model in order to manipulate it. And so I've already created the UVs for the bottom. So let me go to my quick select sets here and say top. And now let me go into top view. And I'm going to say UVs camera based. And let me move this out of the way. And you see it's really stretched out and it's not to scale, and I can go ahead and rescale it, and I can look at the scale based on the scale of the back and start to manipulate what these UVs look like. Let me now go to another selection set and say camera based, but let me change my camera to the front, frame this up, and say UVs, camera based. And now I have my UVs are on top of each other here. So what I can do is I can go in and select these faces, and I can actually leave them, or I can select those and kind of move them. But I'll just leave them on top of each other for now. That's fine. And then I have my last two selection sets to make UVs from. So quick select set and say side cap. And go to my side view here. Oh, and somehow all of these top ones got selected too. Let me go ahead and see if the back one worked, or if it also had those top selection. Okay, so there's my side cap. Let me also just make sure, let me go back to my perspective view here. And I have these UVs, or these faces, selected. And I did end up selecting some of the back, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to deselect these from my selection. and go back to my side view and say camera based. Okay, and so of course these are way larger. That's okay. And then because I had all of these selected accidentally, because I'm kind of rushing here, let me go ahead and paint on my selection for deselect everything. So I don't have anything selected here. And let me go in and paint my selection in. And I believe I need these bottom 4 in here too. And let's see, I don't think I need these. I'm gonna go back. I'm gonna change the size of my brush by pressing the B key and just scaling it down. Paint these on and then just deselect what I don't want to have selected. And that would include all of these back faces here. And do one more side view. Oh, it doesn't want to pull up when I hit spacebar for some strange reason. Let me go ahead to my, let's see if right view will show it. Let me see if left view shows it. Oh, somehow, not sure what's going on, why it's selecting the wrong things. This is why quick select sets are kind of nice. Oh, I have them all here, I guess. This is why quick select sets are kind of nice, because I'm able to undo something. There we are. Let me deselect from this side. Okay. Sorry, this is taking a little bit longer. I would like. Okay, I think that's the selection that I want. Not these back faces though. And let me go ahead then inside side X. Let's go back to right view maybe. Let's go to left view. There we are. And UV camera based. And I guess it selected those. I'm not sure why. Let me undo that. I didn't want these selected. Let me go back to my UV texture editor here and see. And let me go in here and deselect. All of these faces. Go back here again and say UV camera based. And let's look at our UVs now, UV texture editor. Okay, so let me now move this grouping, this cap. So I have all my cap sides, I have my cap front, and then you can kind of see what we still have left over here, which are a series of faces that didn't get assigned when I selected my sets, which are those faces. So what I'm going to do is maybe say camera based for those, go back to my right view and say UV camera based. Now that's like gigantic, but I can see where I need to sew that. So let me go kind of scale this guy down quite a bit, move it to, I believe it needs to be attached right here, and double check by going to my edge mode and seeing where those edges meet. And so I'm going to just select these edges and I'll say sew, and those will bring them together. And I might want to now scale, move this whole part kind of up a little bit. Maybe just this edge needs to move up. But this is something that I can start to tweak. Go to face mode. Select these faces and scale the faces and move this up. And so now I have something starting to work, starting to look okay. So then the last faces I have here, if I select them in my UV texture editor to assign, are these back faces. And so I'm going to actually do it from the front perspective camera again, from my front orthographic view. Even though I can't see them, I can see them if I hit wireframe. Oh, I still have the back faces as well. Okay, well those I think are right here. So let me go ahead. Those are looking actually okay. Kind of forgot about them. So let me deselect these, and then those have already been mapped, so I can maybe scale them up, scale up the back. And now I can think about kind of arranging these in a way that would make the texturing work out pretty well. Let me go ahead and move this over and up and rotate this. Rotate it again. And maybe it needs to be scaled down to the same width. And let me just see where these edges meet up. So this is the wrong side. I'm going to want to flip this and make sure I'm working in face mode. Otherwise, I'm going to end up moving everything. Rotate this all the way around and move them up. Okay. And I can move all of these up. And then my guess would be I would be texturing my cap with a different image than I'd be texturing the tube, but I'm not really sure about that. What I might want to do here is move these UVs all the way here. Let me go ahead and make a quick select set. And say back cap. I'm not sure if I did that already. So the reason why those quick select sets are really helpful now is that, you know, I might have these UVs overlapping like I do here, and so if I want to select this inner part of the, you know, this inner part of the cap, or the most front view of the cap, if I have made a quick select set of them, I can select it. Like I can go up and I can say, you know, select the bottom, and it will select all of them here. So now I'm able to kind of move and manipulate them even in my UV space. So if my UV faces are overlapping each other, for instance, if I want the back and the front of this if I want the back and the front of the tube to have the same texture applied to it, then you know, I might want to put these UVs like right on top of each other, like rotate this around and move it down and like put it right on top of the other one. And so now to try to go in and select faces here becomes like pretty difficult to work that way. So if I have those quick select sets working for me, then I'm able to make my selection like pretty easily. I might want to go ahead and center the pivot here. I don't know if I can do that actually in my modify. I might have to do it in modify, center pivot. I don't know if that really worked or not. Okay, and so let me go ahead and scale all of this to size. Let me scale this down too. And like this is going to be the same diameter as the beginning of the tube. So let me move this down. And I'm going to start to move this into my 1-to-1. And then let me go ahead and move this over here. And I'll move this one over here, get them kind of lined up. And then it's always good practice, unless you have a texture that is kind of seamless, meaning that wherever there's this kind of break, where it repeats, that it blends really well. And that's something we can maybe get into if anybody wants to. Otherwise, when we're back on campus, I can show you how to make textures in Photoshop. But I'm just going to bring this all down into my 1 by 1 part of the grid here. And now if I go back to my texture to visualize my texture, and I don't have anything applied, so let me go back to perspective view and make sure I'm in shaded with textures here. And let me assign an existing material to this object. Let me assign my Lambert 2. And now I have my texture applied across this tube in a way that looks pretty seamless. Maybe not so great with the front of the tube. I don't know if I would necessarily apply the same texture to the cap as I would to the rest of the tube, but I hope that this gives you a really good understanding of how to work with UVs. And UVs are really important because particularly what we're going to be doing next, which is painting our own textures, setting the UVs is something that you're going to want to do before you bring this model into Mudbox. I'm going to go ahead and reassign the Lambert 1 here to this cap, and I don't necessarily know if Mudbox is going to be okay with overlapping UVs. If they're not, I'll come back in here and pull all of these UVs out so that they're laying flat on the map. I actually think I'm going to do that really fast. So applying a texture, in Maya, this works, but let me go ahead and pull these UVs up, make these UVs apart from each other so we don't have any overlapping UVs. Let me go ahead and paint these faces. So again, I can select on my model, or I can select in my texture editor. Either one's fine. Go ahead and move these out of the way. And I'm going to go ahead and select these faces, which I could use my quick select set or just select them really fast here and move them out of the way. So nothing's overlapping, everything's been laid out. And I'm going to go ahead and save this and send this object to Mudbox. The last thing I'm going to do before I do that is I want to move this. I'm going to move both of these. I want to move my, my new paint tube to the center of the grid. And I'm going to go snap to grid. And the reason I want to do this is just because then it's going to be in the center of the workspace in Mudbox, which will make it easier to toggle around. And I do want this to be centered on my model. So center pivot and put this right at the origin. And I'm going to go ahead and save my scene. I still have my original paint tube here. It's not visible at the moment, but let's end this here, and when we come back, we'll send this to Mudbox.